Hello, friends. If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I'm Dr. Emma Caldwell, and for 15 years I've performed organ transplant surgeries at Seattle Grace Medical Center. I've transplanted over 400 hearts, livers, kidneys, and lungs into patients whose own organs had failed. But what happened with 5 transplant patients over 3 weeks in November 2024 revealed something medicine doesn't acknowledge. Something that suggests memory isn't stored just in the brain, but in every cell of every organ. And sometimes, when you transplant an organ, you transplant more than just tissue. You transplant the donor's final memories, their last thoughts, their death. I'm Dr. Emma Caldwell, and for 15 years I've performed organ transplant surgeries at Seattle Grace Medical Center. I've transplanted over 400 hearts, livers, kidneys, and lungs into patients whose own organs had failed. I've held beating hearts in my hands, connected blood vessels thinner than thread, and given people second chances at life when their bodies had given up. But what happened with 5 transplant patients over 3 weeks in November 2024 revealed something about human consciousness that medicine doesn't acknowledge. Something that suggests memory and awareness aren't stored just in the brain, but in every cell of every organ. And sometimes when you transplant an organ from one person to another, you transplant more than just tissue. You transplant the donor's final memories, their last thoughts, their death. And if that donor didn't die naturally, if they were murdered for their organs, the recipients inherit the knowledge of that murder. They experience the donor's terror. They see the killer's face, and they start having nightmares that aren't their own. 5 patients, 5 transplants, 5 donors who were killed so their organs could be harvested and sold. And I was the surgeon who put those murdered organs into living bodies, not knowing I was creating witnesses to crimes that were never supposed to be discovered. This is the story of how I uncovered an organ trafficking operation that had been operating for 3 years, harvesting organs from living victims and hiding behind the legitimate transplant system, and how the cellular memory in those organs revealed everything. November 2nd, 2024. A Tuesday morning. I arrived at Seattle Grace at 5:30 a.m. for a 7:00 a.m. liver transplant surgery. My patient was Robert Henley, 54 years old, end-stage cirrhosis, on the transplant waiting list for 18 months. He'd been declining rapidly, given only weeks to live without a new liver. The night before, at 11:47 p.m., Allison Murphy, our organ procurement coordinator, had called with good news. A compatible liver had become available. The donor was a 32-year-old male, motorcycle accident victim, brain dead but organs viable. Family had consented to donation. All standard procedure. By 7:15 a.m., I was in operating room 4 with my surgical team, beginning the complex procedure of removing Robert's diseased liver and replacing it with the donor organ. The surgery went perfectly. Textbook transplant, no complications, excellent tissue perfusion. By 11:30 a.m., Robert was in recovery with a functioning new liver. I felt the familiar satisfaction of another successful transplant, another life saved. Robert would leave the hospital in a week, return to his family, get a second chance. I had no idea that within 72 hours he'd be screaming in his hospital room about memories of being murdered. November 5th, Thursday afternoon. I was reviewing post-op patients when a nurse paged me urgently to Robert Henley's room. Dr. Caldwell, Mr. Henley is experiencing severe psychological distress. He's been having nightmares and now claims they're not his memories. I found Robert sitting up in bed, pale and trembling, his eyes wide with terror I'd never seen in a post-transplant patient before. "Robert, what's happening? Are you in pain?" "Dr. Caldwell, I keep seeing things, feeling things, but they're not mine. It's like I'm experiencing someone else's memories." His voice was shaking. "I see a warehouse. I'm being held down. Someone is cutting into me while I'm still alive. I'm screaming, but no one can hear me. And I know, God help me, I know, that this is how the donor died. Not a motorcycle accident. He was murdered for his organs." I froze. "Robert, you're experiencing post-surgical trauma and medication side effects. The donor died in a documented motorcycle accident. His family consented to donation. This is all verified." "No. You don't understand. These aren't hallucinations. They're memories. His memories. I can feel what he felt. I can see the man who killed him. I can remember the terror of being conscious while they harvested his organs. I ordered psychiatric evaluation, assuming Robert was experiencing post-transplant delirium, a known complication where patients sometimes have vivid dreams and confusion from medications and surgical stress. But Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, my surgical partner, pulled me aside after examining Robert. "Emma, his descriptions are incredibly specific. He's describing details about organ harvesting procedures that a layperson shouldn't know. Precise surgical techniques, equipment, the order organs are typically removed. He's describing it from the perspective of the victim being harvested. It's coincidence, or he researched transplant procedures online and his confused mind is incorporating that information into dreams. Maybe, but Emma, he described the killer. Tall, maybe 6'2", approximately 200 pounds. Surgical mask, but distinctive eyes. One brown, one partially blue. Heterochromia. He described a scar on the killer's left hand between thumb and index finger. Those are very specific details. You're not seriously suggesting the liver contains memories of the donor's death. I'm saying we should investigate before dismissing it. If there's even a chance Robert's visions are based on real events, we need to know." November 7th, Saturday evening. I received another urgent page, this time about Catherine Mills, 38 years old, who'd received a kidney transplant 5 days earlier. Different donor, different surgery, same disturbing symptoms. She's describing memories that aren't hers, the attending nurse reported. Says she keeps seeing herself being grabbed in a parking garage, injected with something, waking up on a table surrounded by surgical equipment. Claims she can remember being conscious during organ removal. 2 patients. 2 different organs, 2 different donors, both reporting memories of being murdered for organ harvesting. "Catherine, I need you to describe exactly what you're seeing," I said, sitting beside her bed. She was crying, but her voice was steady. "I was leaving work. It was late, maybe 9 p.m. I walked to my car in the parking garage. Someone grabbed me from behind. I felt a needle in my neck. Everything went black. When I woke up, I couldn't move, but I was aware. Paralyzed, but conscious. I could see surgical lights, feel hands cutting into me, and I tried to scream, but couldn't make sound. They were taking my kidney while I was alive." Catherine, the donor's family consented to donation after a documented car accident. I'm not making this up. I can remember things only the victim could know. The parking garage was in downtown Seattle, 3rd level, northwest corner. The car was a blue Honda Civic, license plate starting with BFH. The person who grabbed me had tattoos on both arms, detailed sleeves with dragons and skulls. I can describe everything because I experienced it. Not as me, but as the donor. I checked the donor records. Female, 29 years old, listed cause of death as car accident with family consent for donation. But I had Catherine's specific details now: parking garage location, car description, partial license plate, attacker's tattoos. Detective Ryan Foster from Seattle PD's Organ Trafficking Task Force arrived at the hospital within 2 hours of my call. Dr. Caldwell, organ trafficking is a serious problem, but we've never had a case in Seattle involving major hospital transplant programs. You're suggesting an organized operation is murdering people for organs and somehow getting them into the legitimate transplant system. I'm suggesting my patients are reporting memories that don't belong to them. Memories that suggest their donors didn't die the way official records indicate. I gave him Catherine's descriptions: the parking garage, the car, the attacker's tattoos. His expression grew serious. We have an open missing person case matching that description. Jennifer Morrison, 29, disappeared 3 weeks ago after leaving work. Her car was found in a downtown parking garage, 3rd level, northwest corner. Blue Honda Civic, license plate BFH 22847. No signs of struggle, just vanished. We haven't found her body. Because you didn't know to look in organ transplant recipients. Jesus Christ. You're telling me Jennifer Morrison was murdered for her kidney, and that kidney is now in Catherine Mills, who's experiencing Morrison's memories? I'm telling you, that's what Catherine is claiming, and I have another patient describing similar memories from a liver transplant. Foster pulled out his phone. I need to see all donor records for both organs. If these memories are real, if organs can somehow retain consciousness or memory from donors, we might be able to identify a serial killer using the transplant system. Over the next 48 hours, Foster investigated both donor histories. The liver donor, supposedly a 32-year-old motorcycle accident victim, had no accident report on file. No police record, no hospital ER admission before being declared brain dead and moved to organ procurement. Just appeared in the system as a donor with family consent. The kidney donor matched Jennifer Morrison's description perfectly, but the official record listed her as Jane Doe, car accident victim, with anonymous family consent obtained through a funeral home that, when investigated, didn't exist. Someone is falsifying donor records, Foster said during our emergency meeting with the hospital administration. They're killing people, harvesting organs, and inserting them into the legitimate transplant system with fake documentation. And they're doing it well enough that no one noticed until the recipients started reporting impossible memories. How is that possible? I asked. There are multiple verification steps, cross-checking, documentation requirements, which means someone inside the system is helping them. Someone with access to donor databases. Someone who can create convincing paperwork. Someone who can make murdered victims appear as legitimate donors. November 9th, Monday. I had 3 more transplant surgeries scheduled that week. One went forward with a verified donor from a documented accident. But 2 were postponed when Foster flagged the donors as suspicious. Documentation looked legitimate, but couldn't be verified beyond the hospital system. Emma, we need to check all recent transplants, Marcus said. If there's a pattern, we need to identify every recipient who might have received organs from murder victims. We reviewed 6 months of transplant records. Out of 47 transplants performed at Seattle Grace during that period, 5 showed the same documentation irregularities, donors who appeared in the system but had no external verification of their death circumstances. Robert Henley, liver. Catherine Mills, kidney. And 3 others: James Porter, heart, Lisa Garrett, lung, and Michael Torres, kidney. I contacted all 3. James and Lisa reported no unusual memories, but Michael Torres had been experiencing disturbing dreams since his transplant 2 weeks earlier. I keep seeing myself in a homeless shelter, Michael said when I visited him at home. I'm sleeping on a cot. Someone offers me money to participate in a medical study. I agree because I need the cash. They drive me to a warehouse, say they need blood samples. Next thing I know, I'm waking up on a table and someone is cutting into me. I try to move, but I'm paralyzed. I can feel everything, but can't scream. They're taking my kidney while I'm conscious. 3 recipients. 3 different organs. 3 consistent stories of being murdered while conscious for organ harvesting. These aren't random crimes, Foster said. This is an organized operation. They're selecting victims who won't be missed. Homeless, undocumented immigrants, people who can disappear without major investigations. They're paralyzing them with drugs that allow consciousness but prevent movement. And they're harvesting organs from living victims to ensure maximum organ viability. But how are they getting the organs into our hospital system? That's what we need to find out. Someone on the inside is facilitating this. November 11th. Foster obtained warrants to investigate all hospital personnel with access to donor databases. The investigation focused on Allison Murphy, our organ procurement coordinator, who had processed all 5 suspicious transplants. Dr. Caldwell, I need you to know I would never compromise organ donation ethics, Allison said when questioned. But I'll admit something has felt wrong lately. Donors appearing in the system with perfect documentation but no hospital history. I questioned it twice, was told the paperwork came through partner hospitals in other states. I trusted the system. Who told you that? Dr. Raymond Haskell, the transplant program director. Dr. Haskell, the administrative overseer of Seattle Grace's transplant program. He had complete access to donor systems, authority to approve questionable documentation, and means to bypass verification protocols. Foster arrested Haskell on November 12th. Under interrogation, Haskell claimed ignorance, but evidence found in his office told a different story. Encrypted communications with an organ trafficking network. Payments totaling over $2 million, and schedules coordinating donor availability with planned surgeries. We have enough to charge him with conspiracy, Foster said. But I need to find the actual harvesting operation. They're killing people in a warehouse somewhere in Seattle. I need the recipient's memories to locate it. Over the next 3 days, I worked with Robert Henley, Catherine Mills, and Michael Torres, helping them recall every detail from the memories transferred through their transplanted organs. It was surreal. These people were accessing information stored in cellular tissue, memories encoded in organs harvested from murder victims. Robert described the warehouse in vivid detail. It's in an industrial area near water. I can hear foghorns. The building has a loading dock on the south side, 2 stories, with the harvesting facility on the 2nd floor. There are windows, but they're blacked out. I can remember the view from the table where the donor was killed. Metal rafters overhead, old wooden floors, smell of salt water and rust. Catherine added, "The person who grabbed me, the one with the tattoos, I can see him clearly now. Not just the tattoos, but his face. He had a scar through his left eyebrow, maybe 6'1", broad shoulders. He drove a white van with no windows. I remember the inside, steel floor, restraints welded to the walls. He's done this before, many times." Michael's memories provided operational details. They have medical equipment, surgical tools, anesthesia machines, organ preservation systems. The doctor running it isn't legitimate, but he knows surgical procedures. He's trained. I can remember his voice, the things he said while cutting into the donor. He talked about organ viability, preservation times, matching recipients. He's done this enough to be efficient. Detective Foster compiled all the details into a profile and location search. Industrial area near water, 2-story building with loading dock, accessible by van that narrows it to about 40 structures in Seattle's Port District. we'll canvass them all. But I had another idea. The recipients are all experiencing these memories at specific times, usually late at night, between 2 and 4 a.m. What if that's when the murders occurred? What if the cellular memory is strongest at the time of trauma? So tonight, we have them try to access the memories again, see if additional details emerge during the high-activity window. Exactly. Maybe they can remember addresses, street names, specific landmarks. On the night of November 14th, I sat with all 3 recipients in a private hospital conference room, monitoring equipment on hand in case the psychological stress became too severe. Detective Foster was there, along with Marcus and a police sketch artist. At 2:17 a.m., Robert suddenly gasped. I'm there again, in the warehouse. They're cutting into me, God, the pain, but I can see out the window now, through a gap in the blackout covering. There's a sign across the street, Harbor Marine Supply. Red letters, white background. The sketch artist worked quickly, drawing based on Robert's descriptions. Catherine and Michael were both breathing rapidly, eyes closed, accessing memories that weren't their own. I can see the driver's face clearly now, Catherine said. Every detail. The scar, the tattoos, but also a birthmark on his neck, left side, shaped like a crescent moon. And I remember something else. Before he grabbed me, I saw him talking to someone else. A woman, blonde, maybe 40, wearing scrubs like medical personnel. She pointed me out, told him I was the target. Michael's voice was shaking. The doctor, who harvested my donor's kidney, I can see his face too. He's older, maybe 60, gray hair, wearing glasses with thick black frames. He has a wedding ring with a distinctive setting, gold, with 3 small diamonds. And he called someone during the procedure. Said, the kidney is ready for Caldwell's patient. Oh my God, Dr. Caldwell, he mentioned you by name. My blood went cold. He what? He said the kidney was ready for your patient, like he knew which surgeon would be doing the transplant. Like this whole operation was coordinated with specific hospital staff. Detective Foster was already on his phone, calling for backup. Dr. Haskell wasn't just approving fake documentation. He was coordinating with the harvesting operation, telling them which organs were needed, when surgeries were scheduled, who the recipients would be. This goes deeper than we thought. Within hours, Foster's team located the warehouse Robert had described, an abandoned fish processing facility near Pier 41, directly across from Harbor Marine Supply. The tactical team moved in at dawn. I wasn't allowed on site during the initial raid, but Foster called me at 7:23 a.m. Emma, we found it. The harvesting facility exactly as described. Surgical equipment, organ preservation systems, restraints. And Emma, we found 3 bodies, 3 recent victims, organs already removed. They're still killing people. Did you catch anyone? No, the place is empty, abandoned recently, probably within hours. They knew we were coming, someone tipped them off. Who? The only people who knew we identified the warehouse were the recipients, my team, and your investigators. Which means we have another leak. Someone in the investigation or at the hospital warned them. That afternoon, I received a text message from an unknown number. Dr. Caldwell, stop the investigation or your patients will die. The organ trafficking doesn't end with one warehouse. If you continue, we'll ensure you never work as a surgeon again. And we'll make sure every recipient who reported memories meets the same fate as their donors. I showed it to Foster immediately. They're threatening the recipients. They know we're using cellular memory to track them. We need to put all 3 recipients under protection. If this operation is willing to kill to protect itself, your patients are targets. Robert Henley, Catherine Mills, and Michael Torres were moved to a secure hospital wing with 24-hour police protection. But even with protection, I knew they weren't safe. The organ trafficking network had demonstrated sophisticated capability, falsifying records, infiltrating hospital systems, coordinating murders. They could reach anyone. On November 16th, everything went wrong. Michael Torres was found unconscious in his protected room at 3:45 a.m. Someone had bypassed security, entered his room, and injected him with a massive dose of immunosuppressants, the medications that prevent organ rejection. In normal doses, they're necessary for transplant patients. In high doses, they're lethal, causing complete immune system shutdown. Michael died at 6:17 a.m., despite aggressive medical intervention. They killed him to silence him, Foster said, standing over Michael's body, and they made it look like accidental overdose or medication error. Plausible deniability. How did they get past security? That's what I need to find out. But Emma, we have to assume they can reach the other recipients too. We need to move Robert and Catherine to completely different locations, maybe out of state, until we shut down this operation. But moving them proved impossible. That evening, Catherine Mills began showing signs of organ rejection, her body attacking the transplanted kidney. It happens sometimes, unpredictably, requiring immediate intervention. As we treated her with higher doses of anti-rejection medications, I realized what was happening. They triggered this deliberately. Someone gave Catherine something that caused acute rejection. Now she needs intensive treatment, can't be moved, is vulnerable. Marcus was monitoring her vital signs. Emma, if we don't control this rejection episode, she'll lose the kidney, possibly die from complications. And if we keep her here, the trafficking network will kill her like they killed Michael. Then we catch them. We use Catherine as bait. It was Detective Foster's suggestion, and Catherine agreed despite the risk. These people murdered 3 donors whose organs are inside me, Robert and Michael. Michael is dead because he remembered too much. I want to help catch them. We set the trap carefully. Catherine would remain in her regular hospital room, with visible police protection that would be quietly removed after midnight. Hidden officers would remain in adjacent rooms, ready to respond immediately when the traffickers made their move. And we'd use me as additional bait. They mentioned you by name, Foster reminded me. The doctor running the harvesting operation said the organs were for Caldwell's patients. You're connected to this somehow. Maybe they want to eliminate you too. The thought was terrifying, but it made sense. I'd performed 5 transplants using murdered victims' organs. I was the unwitting accomplice who'd given those organs new homes. If the operation feared exposure, I was a liability. So we make it look like I'm vulnerable too. Alone in my office, late at night, reviewing donor records. Emma, I can't ask you to put yourself at risk. You're not asking. I'm volunteering. These people have been using me to legitimize murder. They've killed my patients to silence them. I want to help end this. On the night of November 17th, the trap was set. Catherine lay in her hospital room, apparently unguarded. I sat in my office, door unlocked, lights on, obviously alone and distracted by paperwork. The attack came at 2:34 a.m. I heard footsteps in the corridor, soft, careful, professional. My heart raced, but I forced myself to remain focused on the fake donor records I was pretending to review. My office door opened slowly. A figure entered, tall, muscular, with tattoo sleeves visible beneath a hospital orderly uniform. The man Catherine had described, the one who'd grabbed her in the parking garage. He moved toward me silently, syringe in hand. I saw it in my peripheral vision, the same method they'd used on Michael Torres. A lethal injection disguised as medication error. I waited until he was 3 feet away, then rolled my chair backward and shouted, "Now!" Officers burst from the adjacent conference room where they'd been waiting. The attacker spun, tried to run, but was tackled and restrained within seconds. Simultaneously, we heard noise from Catherine's room. Another attacker had entered, attempting to inject her with the same lethal dose. That suspect was also apprehended. "We've got them," Foster said, handcuffing the man who'd entered my office. "But these are just operators. I need the people running this. The doctor who's harvesting organs, the coordinators who are targeting victims." The tattooed attacker smiled, despite being in custody. "You think catching me stops this? This operation has been running for 5 years. We've harvested over 200 organs, supplied transplant programs in 4 states. Catching 2 street-level operators changes nothing. Then tell me who's running it." "Why would I? You've got nothing solid on me. No witnesses to any murders. No evidence connecting me to the harvesting warehouse. Those recipient memories won't hold up in court. They're not admissible evidence. I'll be out in 72 hours. He was right about the legal challenges. Cellular memory wasn't recognized by courts. The recipient's memories, while accurate, couldn't be used as evidence because there was no scientific precedent for organs containing consciousness or memory. But we had something else. During the arrest, officers had collected the syringes both attackers had been carrying. Analysis would show lethal doses of immunosuppressants, proof of attempted murder. "We have you for attempted murder of Catherine Mills and Dr. Caldwell," Foster said. "That's enough to hold you while we build the larger case. Good luck with that." But Foster was already working a different angle. While the attackers were being processed, he examined their phones, seized during arrest. Encrypted communications, but with warrants and tech forensics, they'd be cracked. "These guys are contractors," Foster explained to me after the arrests. "Hired muscle, but their phones will have contact information for whoever hired them. We follow the money, we find the operation's leadership." 3 days later, the phone data revealed everything. The contractors had been hired through encrypted apps, but their payments traced back to a shell company owned by Dr. Raymond Haskell and 2 others. Dr. Jennifer Kowalski, an anesthesiologist at Seattle Grace, and Marcus Hussein, the owner of a funeral home that had provided fake donor documentation. Haskell was coordinating which organs were needed, Foster explained during the briefing. Kowalski was providing the drugs to paralyze victims while keeping them conscious, a specific cocktail that wouldn't be detected in routine post-mortem toxicology. And Ewan was creating false donor documentation and death certificates. But who was actually harvesting the organs? The recipients described a skilled surgeon, someone with extensive training. That's what we're still trying to identify. The doctor at the warehouse isn't in our database. But Emma, Michael Torres, said the harvester mentioned you by name. Ready for Caldwell's patient. That suggests someone who knows your schedule, knows which transplants you're performing. I felt sick. Someone I work with, someone on my surgical team. Foster pulled up a list of all surgical staff who'd been present during the 5 suspicious transplants. 23 names, including nurses, anesthesiologists, surgical techs, and other surgeons. But one name stood out. Dr. Gregory Hammond, a transplant surgeon who'd trained with me, worked beside me for 8 years, assisted on dozens of my surgeries. Greg had access to everything, I said, realization dawning. He knew which organs I needed, when surgeries were scheduled, which recipients would be getting transplants. He could have coordinated with Haskell to ensure the murdered organs ended up in my surgeries specifically. Why you specifically? Because I'm known for high success rates. If the harvested organs were going to be transplanted, they'd want a surgeon with excellent outcomes to ensure the organs weren't wasted. And using me as the unwitting accomplice would provide cover. If anything went wrong, I'd be the one investigated first. Marcus Rodriguez confirmed it. Greg asked me about your schedule constantly. Wanted to know which transplants you had coming up, which organs you needed. I thought he was just being collegial, interested in complex cases. I never questioned it. Detective Foster obtained warrants for Hammond's home, financial records, and communications. The evidence was overwhelming. Payments from the shell company, encrypted messages coordinating organ harvesting with specific surgeries, and most damning, a storage unit containing medical equipment matching what the recipients had described. On November 21st, tactical teams raided Hammond's home at dawn. He was arrested without resistance, sitting calmly in his kitchen drinking coffee, as if he'd been expecting this moment. "Dr. Caldwell," he said when I was brought in to identify him. I wondered when you'd figure it out. Though honestly, I expected it to take longer. The cellular memory phenomenon was unexpected. Fascinating, really. I didn't know organs could retain consciousness that way. Greg, how could you? You're a surgeon. You took an oath to save lives, not murder people for their organs. I saved far more lives than I ended. Over 200 successful transplants using organs that would never have been available through legitimate donation. Do you know how many people die waiting for organs? Thousands every year. I was solving that problem by murdering innocent people. By making a practical choice. Those victims were homeless, addicts, undocumented. People society had already abandoned. I gave their deaths purpose. Their organs saved productive members of society. Isn't that better than letting them waste away on the streets? I wanted to hit him. This man I'd worked beside for 8 years, who I'd trusted with patients' lives, had been systematically murdering people and using me to legitimize it. "You're going to prison for the rest of your life," I said. Perhaps, but the need for organs remains. The waiting lists remain. Someone else will eventually do what I did, because the alternative is watching innocent people die for lack of organs. I'm not a monster, Emma. I'm a pragmatist who is willing to make hard choices you weren't brave enough to make. Dr. Gregory Hammond's arrest should have been the end. The organ trafficking ring exposed, the killers in custody, justice being served. But the investigation revealed something that made everything worse. The operation was larger than Seattle Grace. Over the following week, Detective Foster worked with federal investigators to trace the network's full scope. What they found was horrifying. The organ trafficking operation had been active for 5 years, operating in 11 states, coordinating with corrupt transplant programs at multiple hospitals. Over 200 organs had been harvested from murdered victims and transplanted into unsuspecting recipients by surgeons who, like me, had no idea they were working with illegally obtained organs. We've identified 47 recipients across the country who likely received organs from murder victims, Foster told me during a briefing. We're reaching out to all of them to see if anyone else is experiencing cellular memory phenomena. What are you going to tell them? That the organs keeping them alive came from people who were murdered specifically to harvest those organs. That they're living because someone else was killed. We're going to offer them the truth and psychological support. They deserve to know. But I was struggling with a different truth. 5 of my transplant patients had received murdered organs. Michael Torres was dead, killed to silence him. Catherine Mills and Robert Henley were alive but traumatized by memories of their donors' murders. And 2 others, James Porter, heart transplant, and Lisa Garrett, lung transplant, had received organs from victims but hadn't reported memories. Should I tell them? Warn them that the organs keeping them alive came from murdered donors? Or let them live in ignorance, sparing them the psychological horror? Marcus helped me make the decision. They need to know. If there's any chance they might experience cellular memories later, they should be prepared, and they deserve the truth about their donors. On November 24th, I met with James Porter. He was 58 years old, had received a heart transplant 3 months earlier, and had recovered beautifully. He was planning to return to work, grateful for his second chance at life. Mr. Porter, I need to tell you something difficult about your transplant. The donor whose heart you received, the official documentation was falsified. The donor was actually a victim of organ trafficking, murdered so their organs could be harvested and sold. He stared at me in silence for a long moment. Someone was killed so I could have this heart? Yes. I didn't know at the time. None of us did. The operation was sophisticated enough to bypass our verification systems. But you deserve to know the truth. Who was the donor? We're still trying to identify them. Most of the victims were people who wouldn't be missed, homeless individuals, undocumented immigrants, but we're working to give them all their identities back, to ensure their deaths are acknowledged. James put his hand over his chest, feeling his heartbeat, someone else's heartbeat. This person died so I could live. They didn't choose it, they were murdered. And now I'm alive because of that murder. How am I supposed to live with that? You honor them by living well, by not wasting the life their death gave you, even though neither of you chose this. Have you told the other recipients? I'm telling everyone who received organs from this operation. Some have been experiencing memories from their donors, cellular memory phenomenon. If you start experiencing anything like that, contact me immediately. Over the next 48 hours, I had similar conversations with Lisa Garrett and 14 other recipients at Seattle Grace who'd received organs during the 5-year period the trafficking operation was active. Most were devastated. Several became severely depressed. 2 required psychiatric hospitalization. But 4, including James Porter, began reporting memories after learning the truth, as if knowing their organs came from murder victims opened the door to accessing those cellular memories. James described being grabbed while sleeping under a bridge. I was homeless, lost my job, lost my apartment. I'd been on the streets for 3 months. Someone offered me $500 to participate in a medical study. I was desperate, so I agreed. They drove me to that warehouse. When I realized what was happening, I tried to fight. But they paralyzed me. I was conscious when they cut my chest open and took my heart. His voice broke. I'm living with the heart of a homeless man who was murdered because nobody cared enough to look for him. He had a name. David something. I can't remember his last name, but I can remember his daughter. He had a little girl. He kept thinking about her while they were killing him, hoping she was okay, wishing he could tell her he loved her one more time. James, those memories, can you see the daughter? Yeah. Anything that might help us identify the donor? Her name was Sophie, maybe 8 or 9 years old. Dark hair, gap between her front teeth. He called her his little gap-toothed princess. He kept a photo of her in his pocket. I can see it in his memory, her school photo from 2nd grade. Please find her, dear Caldwell. Please tell Sophie her father was thinking of her when he died. I passed all the information to Detective Foster. Over the next week, his team identified 7 donors based on cellular memories reported by recipients. 7 people who'd been homeless, missing, forgotten, now finally getting their identities and dignity back. One of them was David Morrison, James Porter's heart donor. He'd been homeless for 8 months after losing his job as a mechanic. His daughter Sophie, now 11, had been in foster care since David disappeared. The system had assumed he abandoned her. He didn't abandon her, I told Sophie's social worker. He was murdered, and even in his final moments he was thinking about her, hoping she was safe, wanting to tell her he loved her. Sophie was brought to Seattle Grace to meet James Porter, the man living with her father's heart. The meeting was arranged carefully, with counselors present to support both of them. Your father's heart is beating in my chest, James told Sophie, tears streaming down his face. And through some miracle of cellular memory, I can access his final thoughts. He loved you so much. Even at the end, all he thought about was you. Sophie cried and put her hand on James's chest, feeling the heartbeat that once belonged to her father. Can you hear him? Can you tell him I love him too? I think somehow he knows. I think his heart knows. It was the most beautiful and heartbreaking moment I'd witnessed in 15 years of medicine. But while some donors were being identified and honored, others remained unknown. The trafficking operation had killed over 200 people across 5 years. We'd identified only a fraction of them. Most remained anonymous, their deaths unacknowledged, their organs transplanted into recipients who would never know their names. On December 1st, I received a visitor at my office, a woman in her mid-40s, elegant and composed, introducing herself as Margaret Hammond. Dr. Caldwell, I'm Gregory's wife. I wanted to speak with you before I make a decision about testifying against him. Margaret, anything you tell me could be used in the investigation. I know. That's why I'm here. I need you to understand what Greg did and why, so you can help me decide if I should protect him or help destroy him. She sat down heavily in the chair across from my desk. I've been married to Greg for 22 years. I've known him since medical school. He was brilliant, dedicated, idealistic. He genuinely wanted to save lives. But 12 years ago, something changed. What happened? Our son, Christopher, he was 8 years old and needed a liver transplant. Congenital defect that progressively failed. We put him on the waiting list, but he was low priority. Not sick enough yet to move up the list, but declining steadily. We waited 9 months. And then Christopher died, 3 weeks before a liver became available. 3 weeks. If the liver had come just 3 weeks earlier, my son would be alive today. I felt a wave of sympathy mixed with understanding. I'd lost my daughter, Emily, to leukemia a year ago. I knew the desperate helplessness of watching a child die while waiting for medicine to save them. After Christopher died, Margaret continued, Greg became obsessed with the organ shortage. He researched how many people die waiting for transplants, how many organs go unused because donation rates are too low, how the current system fails thousands of patients every year. He started asking questions. What if we could obtain organs through other means? What if we could save the people who deserve saving? By murdering others. He didn't see it that way. He saw it as making a practical choice that society was too squeamish to make. Use the organs of people society had already abandoned, homeless, addicts, criminals, to save productive citizens. He genuinely believed he was doing good. Margaret, you knew about this. You knew he was murdering people. She nodded slowly. I suspected 3 years ago. I confronted him. He admitted everything. And Dr. Caldwell, I didn't report him. I didn't stop him. Because part of me understood why he was doing it. Our son died because there weren't enough organs. Greg found a way to solve that problem. How could I condemn him for saving lives even if his methods were horrifying? You could have stopped him. You could have saved lives. Or I could have sent my husband to prison and accomplished nothing. Someone else would have filled the gap. The organ shortage doesn't disappear because we arrest one doctor. The thousands of people dying on waiting lists don't get saved by maintaining moral purity while they die. She pulled a folder from her bag and placed it on my desk. This contains everything. Names, locations, finances. I'm giving you complete evidence to destroy the entire network. But I need you to understand something first. This operation saved 200 lives. 200 people who would have died waiting for organs are alive today because of what Greg did. Yes, 200 others died to provide those organs, but those 200 were already dying from addiction, disease, age, homelessness. Society had already given up on them. Greg gave their deaths meaning. You're asking me to see him as a hero. I'm asking you to see him as a man who made an impossible choice in response to an impossible situation. I'm asking you to understand that organ trafficking exists because legitimate donation fails thousands of people every year. And I'm asking you to testify that while Greg's methods were criminal, his motivation was to save lives. I can't do that. Then 200 recipients will learn they're alive because of murder. They'll carry that guilt forever. Suicides have already begun. 2 recipients killed themselves after learning their organs came from murdered donors. How many more will die from the psychological trauma? She stood up to leave, then paused at the door. My son died waiting for an organ that came 3 weeks too late. Your daughter died of leukemia a year ago, according to hospital records. I'm sure you did everything possible to save her. But what if there had been an option? Something unethical, something illegal, but something that would have saved Emily's life? Would you have taken it? After she left, I sat alone in my office for a long time, thinking about Emily. My 8-year-old daughter who died despite every treatment, every prayer, every desperate hope. Would I have accepted an illegally obtained organ if it meant saving her? Would I have looked away from murder if it gave my daughter a second chance? I wanted to say no. I wanted to believe I'd maintain my ethics regardless of personal cost. But I'd held Emily as she died, helpless to save her, and I knew the desperate agony of losing a child. I understood, on some terrible level, why Gregory Hammond had become a monster. Grief and desperation can transform anyone. That night, I went to visit Catherine Mills, one of my surviving recipients. She was home now, recovering well physically but still traumatized by the memories she carried. "Dr. Caldwell, why are you here?" she asked when she opened her door. "I needed to ask you something. The kidney you received came from a woman named Jennifer Morrison, who was murdered so you could have that organ. If you'd known at the time, if someone had told you the only way to save your life was to accept an organ from a murder victim, would you have agreed?" Catherine was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. I was dying. Kidney failure, months to live at most. I was desperate. If someone had offered me a choice, accept a murdered person's organ or die, I honestly don't know what I would have chosen. And now, knowing the truth, carrying Jennifer's memories of being murdered, experiencing her terror, was your life worth that cost? Some days I think yes. I have a husband, 2 kids who need me. My life matters. But other days, I remember Jennifer's face, feel what she felt as they paralyzed her and cut her open. And I wish I'd died instead. I can't reconcile being alive with the cost of how I stayed alive. Jennifer's consciousness is still in that kidney somehow. Part of her lives on in you. Maybe that's worth something. Or maybe it's torture. Maybe Jennifer's consciousness is trapped in my body, aware but unable to control anything, watching me live the life that cost her everything. How is that better than just being dead? I didn't have an answer. Gregory Hammond's trial began on January 15th, 2025. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. Financial records proving payments for murdered organs, communications coordinating harvesting with specific surgeries, testimony from recipients experiencing cellular memories of their donors' deaths. But Hammond's defense strategy was unexpected. His lawyers didn't deny the charges. Instead, they argued necessity, that Hammond's actions, while technically criminal, were morally justified responses to a broken organ donation system that kills thousands annually through bureaucratic failure. Dr. Hammond saved 200 lives, his attorney argued. 200 people who would have died waiting for organs are alive today because of his actions. Yes, 200 others died to provide those organs. But those victims were already dying, from addiction, disease, homelessness. Society had abandoned them. Dr. Hammond gave their deaths meaning by saving others. The prosecution countered with testimony from victims' families, people like Sophie Morrison, whose father David had been murdered for his heart. 12-year-old Sophie took the stand and, with heartbreaking composure, described what it was like learning her father hadn't abandoned her, but had been murdered. My dad was homeless because he lost his job and couldn't afford rent. That didn't make him worthless. That didn't mean he deserved to be killed so someone else could have his heart. He loved me, he was still my dad, and someone decided his life was worth less than a stranger's, so they murdered him. The jury took 7 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty on all 47 counts of first-degree murder, plus dozens of charges related to organ trafficking, conspiracy, and medical fraud. Gregory Hammond was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. Dr. Raymond Haskell, Dr. Jennifer Kowalski, and Marcus Ewan each received 25 to 40-year sentences for their roles in the operation. The 2 contractors who'd attempted to kill Catherine Mills and me received 15-year sentences for attempted murder. Justice was served, but it felt hollow. Because the question Hammond raised, the impossible moral calculation of lives saved versus lives taken, that question remained unanswered. In the months following the trial, I watched my patients struggle with the knowledge of how their organs had been obtained. Some, like James Porter, found ways to honor their donors by living meaningful lives. James established a foundation to help homeless individuals, named after David Morrison, dedicated to ensuring people don't become invisible to society. Others couldn't cope. 3 recipients committed suicide, unable to live with the guilt of being alive because someone else was murdered. The psychological trauma of cellular memory combined with moral guilt proved unbearable. Catherine Mills survived but required ongoing psychiatric care. I wake up every night remembering Jennifer Morrison's death, she told me during a follow-up appointment. I experience her terror, her pain, her desperate hope that someone would save her. And I know I'm alive because no one saved her. How do I live with that? You honor her memory. You live well. You don't waste the life her death gave you. But I didn't ask for this. Neither did she. We're both victims of a system that valued some lives over others. And I'm not sure being alive is better than being dead when every moment reminds me of the murder that made my survival possible. Robert Henley, my liver transplant patient, had a different response. He became an advocate for cellular memory research, working with scientists to understand how organs could retain consciousness and memory from donors. If organs carry consciousness, Robert argued in interviews, then transplant medicine needs to completely rethink its approach. We're not just moving tissue. We're transferring aspects of identity, memory, awareness. Recipients need to be prepared for the possibility of experiencing their donors' memories. The medical community largely rejected his claims. Most doctors insisted cellular memory was a psychological phenomenon, not biological reality. But the evidence from Hammond's victims was undeniable. Recipients describing specific details about their donors' deaths that they had no normal way of knowing. I became involved in the research, working with neuroscientists to study whether organs could truly retain memory at the cellular level. The preliminary findings were fascinating and disturbing. Every cell contains DNA, which is a form of information storage. Every cell has membrane receptors that respond to chemical signals, creating a kind of cellular communication network. If memory is chemically encoded, if consciousness can be distributed throughout the body, rather than concentrated solely in the brain, then organs might indeed carry fragments of the donor's awareness. We're discovering that consciousness might not be a single location in the brain. Dr. Sarah Vance, A neuroscientist collaborating on our research explained during a conference. It might be an emergent property arising from information processing throughout the entire body. If that's true, then transplanting an organ means transplanting part of the donor's distributed consciousness. The implications were staggering. If organs carried consciousness, then every transplant was essentially a partial consciousness transfer. Recipients weren't just receiving tissue, they were incorporating aspects of another person's awareness into their own identity. This changes everything about informed consent, I argued during medical ethics discussions. Recipients need to understand they might experience memories and personality traits from their donors. They need to be prepared for the possibility of sharing their consciousness with someone else. But the transplant community resisted these ideas. Acknowledging cellular memory would complicate an already complex medical procedure. How do you tell patients that accepting an organ might mean accepting fragments of another person's consciousness? How many potential recipients would refuse transplants if they understood the full implications? 6 months after Hammond's conviction, I received a letter from him in prison. Against my better judgment, I read it. Dr. Caldwell, I know you hate me for what I've done. I don't expect forgiveness. But I want you to understand something. I never stopped believing I was saving lives. Every organ I harvested went to someone who desperately needed it. Yes, I killed 200 people to obtain those organs, but I saved 200 others. Net zero mortality, but with the crucial difference that the 200 who died were already dying from addiction, disease, age. The 200 who lived had productive futures ahead of them. Society makes these calculations constantly. We triage in emergencies. We prioritize patients based on survival likelihood. We make impossible choices about who gets limited resources. I simply extended that logic to organ procurement. Your daughter died because there wasn't a cure for her leukemia. If there had been an experimental treatment available, something that worked but required unethical methods to produce, would you have used it to save Emily? Or would you have let her die to maintain moral purity? I'm not asking you to condone what I did. I'm asking you to acknowledge that the organ shortage creates impossible moral situations, and someone has to make impossible choices. I was willing to bear that burden. You weren't. The 200 people alive today because of my actions don't care about my methods. They're alive. They're with their families. They have futures. That has to count for something. I burned the letter after reading it, but his words haunted me because he touched on the question I'd been avoiding for months. What would I have done to save Emily? If someone had offered me an illegally obtained cure, a treatment that worked but came from unethical sources, would I have taken it? Would I have sacrificed my principles to save my daughter? I wanted to say no, but I'd held Emily as she died, watched her 8-year-old body fail despite every treatment, and I knew the answer was more complicated than simple moral certainty. In August 2025, 9 months after the investigation began, Seattle Grace Hospital implemented new protocols based on what we'd learned. All organ donors would undergo enhanced verification. Recipients would receive counseling about potential cellular memory phenomena. The transplant program would work with law enforcement to monitor for signs of trafficking. But these were small changes to address a massive systemic problem. Thousands of people still died every year waiting for organs. The shortage remained. The desperate need remained. And somewhere, someone else would eventually make the same impossible calculations Hammond had made. On the anniversary of Emily's death, I visited her grave for the first time in months. I'd been avoiding it, unable to face the guilt and grief, but I needed to talk to her, even if she couldn't hear. Emily, I don't know if I'm a good person anymore. I've spent a year investigating murder and transplants, watching patients struggle with guilt and cellular memory, trying to understand if saving lives justifies taking others. And I keep coming back to the same question. What would I have done to save you? Hammond was right about one thing. The organ shortage is real, and people die because we can't solve it ethically. But his solution was monstrous. Murder can't be justified, no matter how many lives it saves. Except, I've held beating hearts in my hands. I've given dying patients second chances. I've seen families reunited when transplants worked. And I know that every successful transplant represents someone else's loss. Every organ comes from someone who died, someone whose family had to make the impossible decision to donate. Maybe the real lesson is that transplant medicine always involves impossible choices. Someone always dies so someone else can live. Hammond just made that calculation more explicit and more horrifying. I don't have answers, Emily. I'm a surgeon who saves lives by transplanting organs from the dead into the living. And now I know that those organs carry memories, consciousness, fragments of the donor's awareness. I'm not just moving tissue, I'm transferring pieces of identity from one person to another. Is that beautiful or horrifying? Is that medical miracle or violation of consciousness? I don't know anymore. I stood at her grave for a long time, thinking about consciousness, memory, and what it means to truly die. If organs carry awareness, if transplant recipients experience their donors' memories, then death might not be the end. Part of us might continue, distributed through the bodies of recipients, experiencing life through others' perspectives. Was that immortality or imprisonment? Gift or curse? I didn't have answers, but I knew I would spend the rest of my career studying these questions, trying to understand the mysterious relationship between tissue and consciousness, between the physical organs I transplanted and the memories and awareness they seem to carry. 1 year after Hammond's arrest, I performed my first transplant surgery since the investigation. A liver transplant for a 45-year-old woman with end-stage disease. The donor was thoroughly verified. A motorcycle accident victim with complete documentation. Family consent obtained through legitimate channels. As I held that liver, preparing to transplant it, I thought about cellular memory. If this organ carried fragments of the donor's consciousness, I was about to transfer them into my patient. She would live with someone else's tissue, someone else's memories potentially accessible through that tissue. Was I saving a life or creating a hybrid consciousness? Was this miracle or violation? Dr. Caldwell, are you ready to proceed? My surgical nurse asked. I looked at the organ, healthy tissue that would save my patient's life. Whatever consciousness or memory it might carry, it offered survival to someone who would otherwise die. Yes, I said. Let's proceed. The surgery took 6 hours. Textbook perfect. My patient survived, received a functioning liver, and began her recovery. 3 days later, she reported dreams about riding a motorcycle, memories of a wife and 2 children she'd never met, knowledge of mechanical engineering she'd never studied. The donor had been a mechanical engineer who loved motorcycles and left behind a wife and 2 kids. Cellular memory, consciousness transfer, whatever we called it, the phenomenon was real. I sat with my patient and helped her understand what she was experiencing. You're carrying memories from your donor. It's rare, but it happens. You're not losing your mind. You're accessing information stored in the cellular structure of your transplanted organ. Will it fade? Will I eventually be just myself again? We don't know. Some recipients report that cellular memories fade over time. Others say they persist, becoming a permanent part of their consciousness. You might be living as yourself and someone else simultaneously for the rest of your life. Is that what everyone experiences? Are all transplant recipients carrying fragments of their donors? Possibly. We're only beginning to understand this phenomenon. But yes, I believe most recipients carry some degree of cellular memory from their donors, even if they don't consciously recognize it. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. Then I'm not really alive. I'm a hybrid. Partly me, partly someone who died. I'm living a life that's not entirely mine. You're living a life that's now yours. Yes, you carry memories and consciousness from your donor. But you're still you. You've just expanded to include someone else as well. Maybe that's not a curse. Maybe that's the donor's way of continuing to exist through you. I don't know if she believed me. I'm not sure I believed myself. But I do know this. Transplant medicine will never be the same. We can't unknow what Hammond's investigation revealed. We can't ignore the evidence that organs carry consciousness and memory. We have to acknowledge that every transplant is more than a medical procedure. It's a transfer of identity, awareness, and life experience from one person to another. The organ shortage remains. People still die waiting for transplants. The system is still broken. But Hammond's solution, murdering the vulnerable to save others, that can never be the answer. Some moral lines cannot be crossed, no matter how many lives we could save by crossing them. I'll spend the rest of my career performing transplants, saving lives and trying to understand the mysterious relationship between consciousness and the organs that house it. And I'll live with the knowledge that 5 of my patients carry cellular memories of being murdered for their organs. That 3 recipients committed suicide rather than live with that guilt. That 200 people are alive today because 200 others were killed. The math doesn't balance. It never will. But every time I hold an organ in my hands, preparing to transplant it into someone dying, I think about consciousness, about memory, about what it means to live with pieces of someone else inside you. And I remember Emily, my daughter, who died because medicine couldn't save her. Would I have accepted Hammond's methods if they could have saved her life? I'll never have to answer that question. But I understand now why Hammond made the choices he did, even as I condemn those choices. Grief and desperation can transform anyone into a monster. The only difference between Hammond and me is that I was never given the opportunity to prove I wasn't. That's the truth I live with now. That's the burden I carry every time I perform a transplant. Some questions have no good answers. Some choices have no right options. We do the best we can with the broken systems we have, and we try to honor the consciousness that persists in the tissue we transplant from the dead into the living. That's all any of us can do.